A word of warning, this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes some strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing. Hello and welcome to a special edition of True Crime News, the podcast. I'm your host, Anna Garcia. Everyone in the world of true crime has a story to tell about a case they worked or they lived through. Some are high profile, some you've never heard of, but they're all fascinating. Today's episode is about serial killers, a specific group of serial killers who tend to hide as long-haul truck drivers. The connection between interstate highways and the disappearance of women along those routes is so real that the FBI has something called the Highway Serial Killing Initiative. It's there to help local authorities with highway murders. There have been approximately 850 murders over the last few decades that line up with truck routes. We're recording this on Monday, July 1st of 2024. Our guest today is Frank Figliuzzi, a retired FBI agent and former assistant director to the Bureau's counterintelligence program. Frank is also the author of Long Haul: Hunting the Highway Serial Killers, which is now available everywhere. Frank, welcome to the program. And as you were just telling me, your book's doing tremendously. It's like at the top of the list.
Well, first, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to a great discussion. And yes, you know, the reception to the book in just about 4 weeks now has been remarkable in the sense that my publisher, HarperCollins, has decided to go into its third printing. That happened within the first 3 weeks. And we're maintaining our #1 bestseller status in the law enforcement category. We've been also #1 in serial killing true crime for a brief time. So why am I happy about this? Obviously, I'm not just talking about the sales. I'm talking about the message that needs to get out about the horror of our highways.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You know, for decades, we've had these conversations about anyone who disappears or whose body is found along one of these corridors, that it's a way of easy entrance, easy exit, kind of hard to find. And as you know, you obviously as a specialist in this area, what I find most fascinating is the potential for so many of these murders to actually be linked to one killer. And so it frightens me that there are that many potential serial killers either out there or have been out there that for the most part, have gone undetected as such.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, what you've just described is kind of the reason for existence of the FBI's Highway Serial Killings Initiative, because this surpasses the capabilities of most local, county, state law enforcement, as we are working with mobile crime scenes in the form of an 18-wheeler big rig. What's happening is these killers, and thankfully we're only talking about a tiny fraction of long-haul truckers, but they're doing damage. They're exploiting the gaps in law enforcement. They're grabbing a victim in one police jurisdiction. They're raping and or murdering her in a second jurisdiction, and they're dumping the remains in a third. So the challenge is immense for most departments to figure this out. The numbers are staggering. We're talking about 850 murders of women alongside the nation's highways, mostly sex-trafficked women in just the last few decades, 450 suspects, long-haul truckers, being looked at right now by the FBI. And of those 850 cases, 200 are considered open and unsolved. That's despite the fact that 25 long-haul truckers are already in prison for multiple homicides.
Are you finding that the changes now in DNA technology, especially with, you know, the incredible lab, Othram Labs, we have them on the program a lot, they really have been instrumental in solving an incredible amount of cold cases because they're able to work with that degraded DNA, which so many labs cannot. Do you feel that now, because of the change in DNA technology, that there is at least the potential to solve some of the colder cases?
No question. And this is one of the bright spots in a rather dark story that I've written. And that bright spot is indeed advancements in DNA analysis, the use of genealogical DNA and access to those databases, particularly the DNA databases that exist for the purpose of helping law enforcement. And yes, decades old cases are now being solved. Even as I researched the book, I had to stop because there were such developments, and I had to incorporate those cases into the book. So that's really good news. The bad news is, that puts in stark reality the fact that, yes, we've gone 30, 40 decades in some of these cases before even knowing who the body belongs to, being able to put a name to the body, being able, let alone to put a name to the killer. But yes, finally, 30, 40 years later, we are starting to do that. But yet, as we say that, the killing continues on the highway.
Is there a case in particular that you want to discuss or that you think really highlights this issue of the difficulty of this really killers on the move who are an integral part of our society and our industry and ability to get things done, who are kind of flying under the radar?
Well, I think so. First, to stay on our good news story, the most recent case of a major serial killer trucker that has been solved through genealogical DNA is the case of Gary Artman. And we're talking about decades before they were able to do that. The Maryland State Police finally, with this very cold case of theirs, decided to try the genealogical DNA route. Got a hit on a suspected family member of the killer. That allowed them to say, wait a minute, same DNA found in a case halfway across the country. So that's good news. With regard to, the cases that illustrate how difficult and challenging this is for law enforcement, look, I feature a case right in the first chapter, the case of Robert Ben Rhodes, arguably the most notorious evil serial killer within the trucking industry. He went decades with killing women. And in one particular heinous case of his, 14-year-old Regina Walters, who he picked up hitchhiking, he was able to cut across the United States. He picked her up hitchhiking outside of Houston. For several weeks, he tortured and raped her and hung her from fish hooks in the back of his rig, and finally killed her in an abandoned farmhouse in Illinois. And I bring this up because yes, they can cut across the United States, across jurisdiction for weeks, and then kill for years. Robert Ben Rhodes is good for at least 50 victims in his killing career. So the disparity between what we see on TV, where everything is solved in a half an hour or an hour show with commercials, right? Yeah. That's just not the reality. And in many cases, because you're dealing with remote stretches of highway, great places for dumping remains, by the way, you don't have police departments talking to each other. They don't even realize that, this body might be connected to other bodies. And so it wasn't until 2004 that the FBI came into this picture and said, we do have multiple serial killers along the highway, and we're going to try to help. They've set up this database, but I will tell you, it's a garbage in, garbage out scenario for this database. They have to preach the gospel, the FBI people who are out of Behavioral Analysis Unit 4 at Quantico, Virginia. They go out on the road and they sell this to police departments. They have to tell them. Many police departments have never heard of the FBI's database for highway serial killings. They might say, well, we entered our case into the VICAP database, Violent Crime Criminal Apprehension, but you're telling me there's a specialized database? Yes, there is. And you've got to get the data in. And that's a challenge for many remote rural county sheriff's departments who certainly don't even have a crime analyst, let alone a homicide detective.
So the victims here, I feel like these, since they're mainly women, that these are the women that we do not hear about. Their families have suffered a tremendous loss, and yet we do not hear about them. The way that their bodies have been tossed on the side, like something to be just disposed of, it is heartbreaking, because at the end of the day, every single one of these women has a family and a story to tell. And I feel like they don't get the attention that they deserve. Disposable
women, disposable victims. You're correct in using that phrase. And Nothing more illustrates that than the case of Bruce Mendenhall, who literally stuffed at least two of his victims naked in trash cans at truck stops. So this is not a metaphor here. This is reality. And it factors into the difficulty in prioritizing and solving these cases as well, because the family members of these women, and sometimes it's not women, it's girls because they're underage, often long ago distance themselves from these family members. And it is a natural human response to trauma in the family. I talked to the top experts in the country about sex trafficking, and they said, look, understand something. To survive the repeated bailing out of jail of their family member, the repeated overdoses and calls from the police, and all of this, family members sometimes say, I've had it and I can't do this anymore. So the families aren't at the police department pounding their fist on the desk, demanding updates and justice, because they don't even know their loved one is missing.
That is so tragic, so tragic. I feel like sometimes, when we discuss crimes, that if the crime is very personal, for example, it's between two people who know each other, and generally those are the types of murders that we see, that society sits back and says, well, at least I'm safe. I can listen to this case safely because this can't happen to me. It's the random cases that, start to unravel people because they're like, oh my God, it's happening in my community, of whether there's a sniper, or whether there's someone throwing rocks from freeways, something very consistent in a localized community, people automatically feel threatened because the crimes you're discussing are taking place over the vastness of the United States. Do you feel that so many people are having trouble connecting to this?
There's often shock when people have read the book. I get a lot of that response as I do interviews and meet with people. They are shocked. And by the way, I was shocked when I found out after 25 years in the FBI, retiring as an assistant director, thinking I knew almost all of the nooks and crannies of the FBI's programs. I find out this is still happening. I find out the program is still going. And the numbers were staggering. So, people go, Frank, is this something you worked in your FBI career? No, I didn't. And it's a dark corner of the FBI in one unit at Quantico. And I wanted to get that story out. You are absolutely right. The vast majority of homicides in America are people who know each other. Yep, most of the time. And so that's another compelling reason for me to get the message out. And the people who are sitting there going, oh, I don't have anybody in my family who's in trafficking or fallen into the trap of trafficking or has, drug addiction. I don't have that. I'm here to tell you a couple of things. First, if you think you don't have trafficking in your city, you do. Particularly if you have intersections of major interstate highways, particularly if you have major bus depots or train stations. If you have all of those, like a city like, say, Toledo, Ohio, that converge together, you have probably a national hub of trafficking, by the way. So it's there, number one. Number two, if you think that no one in your circle, your network, your family, friends, coworkers could ever fall into the trap of trafficking, I will tell you, think again. This book will open your eyes. I interviewed women who had been trafficked to truckers, who survived violent encounters with truckers. And one of the things that floored me was they were from all walks of life and socioeconomic backgrounds and education. I interviewed a preacher's daughter who was violently attacked by truckers when she was trafficked to them. I interviewed a Caucasian girl from the upper Midwest who went to college. She had violent encounters when she was trafficked to truckers. It can happen. So please don't dismiss this. And increasingly, it's happening online. The grooming and recruiting process could be happening as your family member is online dealing with people within her network.
What do you think it is about long-haul trucking, that world, that makes it so possible for a serial killer to be so effective?
this was the overriding question for me that caused me to, after retirement now, put my investigative hat back on, get on the road with a big rig trucker and ride over 2,000 miles across the country to get deeply into this subculture. So, I've had some true crime fans who said, well, this book is kind of true crime, but it's a study, it's a cultural study. And I said, yes, I didn't want to write the book that was just blood and gore and gruesome evil, because yes, there's plenty of it in the book. I wanted to take you deep inside three subcultures: long-haul trucking, sex trafficked victims, and crime analysts. What are their lives like? So I go on the road and listen, it is a very isolating, antisocial environment. It is rather unhealthy in terms of ability to eat healthy, get exercise, interact with people. There is a lot of alcohol use and abuse. There is drug use. Some of the recent statistics, major surveys tell us, particularly when they're anonymous surveys, truckers will tell you that 10% of them drink alcohol every day, 20% binge drink 5 or more drinks at a time.
While they're on the road driving?
Yes. And
my goodness.
And 44% of truckers exhibit signs of major depressive disorder. And by the way, the alcohol stuff became quite clear to me. We stop at a beautiful, one of our stops was at a beautiful truck stop in Racine, Wisconsin, brand new, big, shiny truck stop. We go in there and, the place actually has a liquor department. It's like going to a liquor store. And, you could buy handle size liquor. There's a big bar upstairs. The bar is elbow to elbow with guys, mostly guys, drinking. They're going to be on the road tomorrow morning. It's federally illegal to possess alcohol in your big rig, but yet you can buy a handle size of Tito's and at a truck stop. So why is it attractive? Look, I get into the nature or nurture question of a serial killer, and I'm sure you've explored this in your podcast before, but we know that it's a complex situation. It's not nature or nurture. It's often both. And that means it can sometimes start in the womb with genetic and DNA issues and mental health issues and brain chemistry just not functioning properly. But when you throw an environment, often in these serial killers who are truckers, we find horrific abuse in their childhood, abandonment issues with parents, beatings or verbal abuse. And we see that in the case of, for example, of the vampire trucker I have in the book, Timothy Vathides, evil guy who would rape women and drill their teeth into fangs, just like his teeth were drilled into fangs. And if you look at his childhood, yes, it was replete with horrific abuse. So you've got this kind of really troubled person. They don't like interacting with human beings, and they do gravitate toward a job where they are on their own. Leave me alone. I don't want to interact with anybody. And then once they're on the road, the idea pops into their head that all of this violent tendency that they already have, this anger toward maybe their mother, a woman, suddenly can be manifest, and they realize, I can do just about anything here and get away with it. I take it one step further and I ask a question, because I am that investigator. Which kind of trucking, which kind of trucker is more likely to kill? When I hear from the FBI that they have 450 suspects, I know that that's unwieldy. That number's too large. So I try to take it down. For example, I rode flatbed. That's a very different kind of trucking. That means you've got this long trailer that can, you can carry like 80,000 pounds total. You are physically engaged with a load. You've got to know math and physics. You've got to know weight distribution, points of securement. Is the weight too far forward on one axle? Can I even fill up my 3 tanks today with gas, or is that going to put me overweight? All of that's going on with a flatbedder. That is very different work than the other end of the spectrum. And boy, is there a spectrum and a hierarchy in trucking, even affecting pay. But you go to the other end of the spectrum and you got dry vanners. They're simply delivering a load of dry goods from point A to point B. There is no human interaction. There is no mental engagement with the load. That is a very lonely existence.
Wow. I really appreciate that you use the term evil in describing serial killers, because, we're always trying to find answers, the why. And there's clearly, when it comes to a serial killer, which is just really a completely different kind of a killer, we talk about why people are this way, and many times it's because, sadly, someone in their life made them evil, did evil things to them, and made them evil. And sometimes they don't. They come from really normal families.
Sometimes.
And nothing was done to them as children. But this concept of evil, I think, is really important. I realize it sounds on its most basic level very biblical, but I do believe that there are evil people.
I do too, after 25 years in the FBI, but and thinking again, I've seen horrific crime scenes. I supervised a crimes against children squad for a part of my career in San Francisco. And every day I'd come to work and say, I think I've seen the worst possible aspect of humanity. And then the next day I'd see something worse. And so, yes, we should not be afraid to call some things evil. But I have to tell you, in researching this story, this book, I think I've seen the most evil, gruesome acts repeatedly, people doing this for years. And then the kidnapping of a 14-year-old girl and the raping of her across the country. And, it's not just rape, as if that wasn't bad enough. It's torture. I mean, and this isn't just one killer. I'm talking about this aspect of prolonged torture, multiple rape, hanging somebody from shackles. It was in almost, this element was almost in all of the cases I studied. And it just gives you this torture chamber environment. More than one trucker I looked at had literally set up a torture chamber. Robert Ben Rhodes, who I described as perhaps the worst of the worst, the only thing that stopped him was in Casa Grande, Arizona, Interstate 10 between Phoenix and Tucson. An Arizona state trooper sees a big rig with its hazard lights flashing, stopped along the side of the highway. Trooper pulls over, strolls out of his patrol car, and can hear a woman screaming. And when he looks in the back of Rhodes's sleeper berth, he sees a woman naked, shackled from the ceiling and the floor, screaming her head off. That would have been Ben Rhodes' 51st victim. And that began the unraveling of all of Rhodes' killing. But I wish I could tell you it's unique, but it's not unique.
So what I'm curious about is the work that you did at the FBI. You said this really wasn't a focus of your work. It's only after you left the FBI that you found this so particularly interesting. And I'm wondering why that is.
So even more, it's rare that you get a confession from an FBI agent. But again, I prided myself on knowing the Bureau inside and out. I had a popular podcast a couple of years ago called The Bureau with Frank Figliuzzi. I was allowed to interview active duty FBI personnel in every one of the episodes every week. I was, for a time in my career, the chief inspector of the FBI. That meant that I led audits of all the programs in the FBI. And yet, this floored me. I had a discussion with a woman who said, she worked at the FBI. And I said, oh, what do you do? And she said, I'm the head of the FBI's Highway Serial Killings Initiative. And that's when the numbers came at me. 850 cases, 450 suspects, 200 unsolved, 25 long haulers in prison already. And that I had to unpeel that. And that got me on the road. And by the way, not a pleasant time on the road. I had a great driver, thank God. But sleeping in the upper berth of that bunk bed in the back there, and barely showering for 2,000 miles. At one point I had to insist, we are stopping for a shower tonight. We are, and you get the response, well, time is money, and the shower costs $14. And I'm like, I don't care. I'll pay for it. Let's go.
Yeah, a shower is a must. Oh, yeah. My gosh. Can I pick your brain a little bit about the FBI? Just murders in general. Yeah. Just because, as I always say, when we have a guest of your caliber, you really increase the price of real estate on the podcast. It's such a pleasure, and we don't always have access to someone like you. Are you seeing any changes or trends here, specifically when it comes to the support of the survivor and the support of the victims? One of the things we always talk about on this podcast, we ask the question with every case that we talk about is, what would justice look like? Because every community determines, they have different standards. Everything is very local, as I say. But I feel that overall, the people with the voice that is the lowest, the one that is heard the least, is always going to be the victim survivor. And I don't know what we can do to change that.
So I love this question because I like to think that one objective with this book is to give voice to the victims who have no voice anymore because they've been snuffed out. With regard to survivors, I do have some good news. I mean, everything you've said is totally accurate. Some good news here. Okay. First, the FBI's Victim Witness Program the growth of that program is phenomenal. So every single FBI field office, and there's 56 field offices, has dedicated victim witness specialists who come alongside victim families, if the victim is deceased, or the victim himself or herself. And it is an incredible process. And I did dedicate a podcast episode to the Victim Witness Program because most people think FBI, oh, somebody's getting into handcuffs. Okay. This program is more counseling and therapy and lawful help to victims, sometimes money to victims and witness families. And they stay with you through the entire course of the investigation and all the way through appeals in court. Then when that's done, they'll stay with you and give you notice that this guy that has been convicted, this perpetrator who did this to you, is coming up for a parole hearing or is getting out now, and what steps can we take? So that's one aspect of good news. Other good news in the book related to victims, and I talk about this at some length, is it's now quite clear within law enforcement that a partnership between law enforcement and social services organizations is absolutely paramount if we're going to attack the problem of trafficking, murder, violence. And so what do I mean by that? In places as disparate as Toledo and Phoenix and Las Vegas, what's being done is this partnership now says to a trafficking victim, you're not getting arrested tonight. We're not putting you in handcuffs. What that does, by the way, offline, of course, is it's the realization that if you lock up a trafficker tonight, a trafficked victim, the pimp is going to come and bail her out. So that elevates the pimp even more in her eyes as the hero, right? The only person who loves me, the only person who cares about me is the guy who bails me out. And of course, she's back on the street in a couple of hours. But that realization now, the light bulb has gone on. So instead of saying, I'm arresting you tonight, it's what do you need tonight to get out of this trap you're in? Because we have it. I have a partner here with social services, this private organization or this county organization. If you tell me you need shelter, roof over your head to get away from your pimp, we have that for you, and it will be prolonged. If you tell me that you need diapers for your baby and infant formula because that's why you're on the street, we got that for you. If you tell me you need income and you've always wanted to be a hairstylist or a nurse's aide, we have people in the community who will get you settled and get you that certificate you need to work. So that is working. And from the law enforcement perspective, what I've seen, even in my career, when I was the head of the FBI in Northern Ohio for a period of time, particularly in Toledo, what we saw working was you get the victim witness specialist at the FBI, you get the social services community leader, you get the police department or sheriff's department. And as you build trust with that trafficking victim, she starts to talk. It may take weeks, but she starts to talk. This is my pimp. This is the size and scope of the organization. I was trafficked at the Super Bowl and flown from Toledo, Ohio to the Super Bowl location where I and underage, minor victims were trafficked to big money Super Bowl attendees And by the way, this happens at national political conventions as well, from both parties. And that's when you get the intel. What better intelligence for law enforcement than coming from that trust you develop with a victim?
Is there a case in your career, whether it's the case that you weren't able to solve or maybe you were, that sticks with you? Is there one?
Oh, gosh. So many. I mean, I typically, my first book was called The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence. It was 3 years ago. It became a national bestseller. And I do talk about my career. I supervised this crimes against children squad in San Francisco. And you talk about things you cannot get out of your head. It's that work. It's that work. And at the time I had young children, and I think that makes it even worse. That's where I say, well, I think I've seen the worst there is. And then tomorrow you see the worst again. Best kind of feeling in the world, returning a child kidnapped victim to their parents. You can't beat that. You can catch a terrorist, and I have. You can catch spies, and I have, but nothing like returning a little kid to their parents. But, at the same time, we had a case where we rescued a young girl, I mean, prepubescent girl who was actually being raped live online.
Oh, my God.
Literally kicked in the door of the suspect as this was happening. So, yes, is that a great feeling? You've rescued this victim? Of course. Does it make you sick to your stomach that this victim is forever impacted by this experience? Yes, of course.
Oh, how damaging. How damaging. Oh, my God. I don't know how you sleep at night.
That was a rough time. You do, it's funny. I interviewed, as I said, the head of this initiative for the book, the Highway Serial Killings Initiative. And I asked her the question, and you kind of know the answer because it applies to me too. You hear the word compartmentalization. Well, I've learned to compartment this, and yes, you can, as she did, she said, yeah, I can eat a salad at my desk while I'm looking at the most gruesome crime scene photos from across America. Yes. But do you become numb to that? No, not if you're human. No, you don't want to become numb to that. That's bad. So you've got to kind of understand that I'm doing this at work and I've got to have other things going on in my life. I have to. And I have to prioritize those other things in my life. But this notion that, I compartment it, therefore I'm fine. No, that's not true. And it's why with regard to some of this work, and particularly when it involves children, now we're kind of straying from the highway now. But the FBI does require, counseling. And, they watch how long you're in this work. There are some people who say you shouldn't do this, the crimes against children stuff, you shouldn't do it for more than 2 years. But then, of course, you lose the expertise because some of the best people in this are people who've done it for years. So they do have check-ins. They encourage you to rotate assignments. Not something you should do forever, for sure.
No, but to get back to your book, what are you hoping as far as just the common person is going to walk away from this book?
So number one, I'm all about awareness. If I've increased your awareness and your vigilance as you travel on the highway, fantastic. If maybe you're traveling alone at night, as so many of us will this summer on vacation, on long stretches of highway, please be aware of your gas gauge in your car, where your fuel is, right? You do not want to run out of gas along a remote highway at night. You just don't. Be aware. If you can avoid getting gas at a truck stop, there's truck stops that also have a car side.
Yeah, they do. Like those are those are generally the busiest ones, right?
Yeah. At night, woman alone, if you can avoid that, go to a regular rest stop with no trucks. I don't mean to paint truckers as all bad. They're not. I say this in the book. I dedicate my book in part to the stalwart American trucker. Our economy won't survive without these truckers. They're family people just trying to put food on their table, and they're great people. But you've got to be aware of this. What else do I hope comes from this besides just vigilance on the road? I think so. I would love for police executives to read this, and some are, and say, you know what? We're not entering our data, our unsolved cases along the highway into the HSK database. We're not, and we need to do it. That would be wonderful. If there are victim families who read the book and say to their police department, have you entered my loved one's case into the FBI database? That would be good. If there
I really like that because that's very proactive.
Yes, the sense of helplessness can go away if you're doing that. If more police departments are aware of this and say, yes, we should be partnering with the local community social services organizations. Yes, we should. Fantastic. And of course, best of all possible outcomes here, someone who is in the trap of trafficking or realizing they're about to fall into it and saying, I need out of this, I can get out, because they've read the later portion of my book where I discuss the resources, tremendous programs right now. I visited some of them. I visited Starfish Place in Phoenix that is a residential campus for young women who have little kids and they want out of trafficking. Fantastic work. If a victim or potential victim reads this and says it's time for me to get out and I now know there's help, awesome. Those are some of the outcomes. If the trucking industry reads this and says we can do better with our drivers, we can vet and do background investigations better, we can care more about the health of our truckers, fantastic.
There's a question about the serial killer and the truck driver. So is it that the serial killer seeks out this as a job, or do they already have the job as all of a sudden these uncontrollable urges begin and their evil starts to grow?
Right. I do explore that question. And again, it's fairly complex, but I do not believe that as demented and ill as these people are, that they actually say, gee, I think I'll pursue a commercial driver's license and pay for that training and then apply for jobs for the sole purpose of killing people. That's how I think I want to kill people. I don't think that happens. I think what happens is, as I've described, the mindset of this person is isolated, hermit-like. I hate talking to people. I don't even, I'm not just a misogynist. I hate women. I'm a misanthrope. I kind of hate people. And so what better job than to seek out the job that lets you be who you are, right? And then once they're in that job and they realize, my God, this is a perfect situation. I already hate women and I have violent predisposition. I can have sex for money on the road. Gosh, I can beat this woman that I'm having sex for money with. I can kill at will and dump the body in some of the remotest parts of our country and be on my way before anybody understands what's happened. So that's the order of things. I don't think people sign up to kill. I think they realize they now are in a scenario that allows them to kill unfettered.
That is fascinating. And Frank, I'm really appreciative of the tips you give just for women driving. Because yes, this week is 4th of July week when we're recording this, and lots of people are hitting the road. And that idea of knowing that you must always have a full tank and that you don't want to be stopping late at night for that full tank, if it's at all possible. I live in California and the fear of disaster looms 24/7. And so I literally am always watching my fuel gauge, because my fear is that if I don't have a full tank, if I can do something about this, that there's going to be a disaster in the morning and then I won't be able to get gas and I won't be, this is how I live. It's like in constant worry.
It's just, we're laughing, but it's literally in the FBI manual for FBI agents that you should never let your gas gauge go below half tank.
I agree with that, with the whole half tank. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Now that, of course, for agents, that's because you never know if you're going to have to respond to a place 2 hours away. You never know if you're going to jump into a surveillance or a chase. So, of course, right? But that's good advice for everybody. And then also, what I tell people is when you stop at that remote gas station or any gas station, take your key fob and put it in your pocket.
Yes, don't leave it in the car.
And lock the car. You say, well, lock the car. How do I get the gas in? You can open your gas tank door and then lock the car. Of course you can. Then if you've got to go use the restroom or pick up a snack in the convenience store at the gas station, move your car. Don't leave your car at the gas pump. move your car close into the door of that store so that you have quick access to your car and you're not walking a distance where someone can grab you. You have visibility on your car, right? Just little stuff like that can help.
Wow. I'm adding to my list now. Yeah, I probably wouldn't move the car from the pump. I'd be like, oh, that's a waste of time.
Yeah, you're basically saying, take me, right? Here's my car. I'll be back soon. And it's a great thing, as opposed to parking amongst all the other cars and being able to jump into it.
Wow. I do believe that we all have that, like the gut. We all have, and we try to override our gut with logic. But there have been so many times, like, I will either pull over to something or pull in, and I will get a feeling, and I'm like, nope, I'm leaving right now. I can't put my finger on it, but right. I know I'm not getting out of my car.
I tell people to trust their gut. And if you're on the highway and you think you're being followed, this trucker, this car, this whatever has been on me for a long time. He stops where I stop. He moves where I go. Pick up your phone and call 911 and be aware. We talk about being aware of your gas gauge. Be aware of where you are, because so many people, they call 911 and the operator goes, "Where are you?"
I don't know.
I don't know. What's the last exit? I don't know. What's the mile marker? I'm not sure. So you got to do that too in your head. There are cases, talking about these truck stops. There are cases, at least two that I've found, where a trucker has spotted a woman and followed her home even on foot. So there's a case where a woman came from an adjacent neighborhood. She came to the convenience store at the truck stop to buy who knows what. Trucker spots her, parks his truck, gets out on foot, follows her to her house, and kills her in her house. So not a sex traffic victim, right?
No.
Another case where a trucker got into a neighborhood outside of Boston, tried doorknobs on houses at night, found one unlocked, went in. There was a 14-year-old girl, 14 or 15-year-old girl sleeping in her bedroom, mom and dad sleeping down the hall. Mom and dad awakened by the sound of a whimper, get out of bed, check the daughter. There's a guy who's got her by the throat in her bedroom. And now the fight is on, and thankfully the parents won that fight and the cops showed up. But my point is, it's not all sex traffic victims. It's not all happening just on the highway. And that's why the vigilance is important.
It really is. Well, Frank, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the program, and much success with your book. Where can people follow you, either on social media or through a website? Because you clearly have a lot of projects going on.
Well, thanks for asking. I am a full-time national security analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. You can catch me there. I do have a website, frankfigluzzi.com, that has all of my clips, appearances. I write a regular column for MSNBC Daily online. You can subscribe for free. You can sign up for free at my website for alerts that get sent out every week of what's going on in the news, my latest columns and appearances, et cetera. And I'm across social media on Twitter, now known as X, on Instagram, and on Threads.
Excellent. Well, you can find me at Anna G News on all social media. You can find this episode and all episodes of our podcast wherever y'all get your podcast. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. And don't forget about we have a newsletter too, Frank.
Sure you do. Of course.
I know. As I always say to the team, that's so 1990s.
It's important.
It is important, yes. And we have one, and you can subscribe to it at truecrimenews.com. Look, we have changed all our handles to line up now. So if you're looking for us, it's pretty easy. It's at My True Crime News. Simple as that. My True Crime News. Thanks again, Frank. This has been such a pleasure. And for all of you, this is True Crime News, the podcast. Until next week, I'm your host, Anna Garcia. And it was, as we always say, don't do crime.